Mm-hmm.
I can't blame them for either one. All right. So with that, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the next section of our recruiting webinars that we're doing with Diamond College Advisory Team, our camp recruiting partner, and our friends over at DCAT. Tonight, we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of your recruiting. First, I want to give a kind of brief overview of what the agenda is and what the topics we'll cover for the evening. After some brief introductions, we're going to work into the do's and don'ts of recruiting. And we kind of separated this out into 4 different sections, all phrased as a do this, don't do this, kind of like the eat this, not that type cookbook. Coach communication, getting recruiting exposure, showcases or tournaments and kind of how to perform when you're there, general recruiting, which is a kind of a catch-all bucket for some of the other things that we want to make sure we mention and touch on. And then towards the end, we're going to transition into a Q&A to get all those questions answered. So feel free, if a question comes up, a follow-up question, a thought you have over the course of the evening, fire it away into that toolbar, and I'll be collecting those for that Q&A portion. So first up, some introductions. Bonnie, could you give yourself a brief intro of where you're coming from, who you are, what you're doing?
Sure, sure. I know that all of you are fully capable of reading through all those bullet points, but I'm going to kind of put all of those pieces together. I played at Yale University. I've coached at the Division I level at UConn and at Furman University. Had the great pleasure and opportunity to coach on the international level. What all that means is I've been around the game as a player, a coach for more than 30 years. I've also refereed college basketball and traveled to campuses all over the country. I grew up in Connecticut. I lived in Colorado. I'm now in South Carolina. So I've been in a lot of different regions. All of that to say, I've got a lot of experience, of course, in the softball space, but also knowing different types of campuses. I've been through this recruiting process with hundreds and hundreds of families probably at this point. And going into my 9th year working with DCAT, we've got a really good formula for how to make the most of this process for yourself without driving yourself crazy or spending all of your money and all of your time, but really just being able to hone things down to tapping into some of this experience and me being able to know what the rhythms and routines are for all the different schools that you may be looking at. But thanks for joining us tonight. I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Bonnie. And again, I mean, so much incredible experience to be sharing as a player, as a coach, and as an advisor. So thank you for taking the time out of your evening to share that experience and expertise. My name is Max McKenna. Once upon a time, I played college baseball at Amherst College up in Massachusetts. After that, went into teaching and coaching for a few years at a couple independent private schools in New England, first at Phillips Andover, and then at the Master's School outside New York City, and came back to Head First full-time in 2014. I had interned for Head First for a couple summers while I was in college, while I was playing in college, and then came back full-time in 2014. And really since then, to highlight Bonnie's point, you can read the bullets as well, but the experience there has been working with directly with this division, with our Head First Showcase camps, working with families and student athletes like you all, like those that attend our camps, to help give insight into the recruiting process, conversations with coaches, conversations with players, conversations with parents to understand what it is they're looking for, the guidance they're looking for, and then crafting the sort of stuff that we can do to help address that and really work with families to give them the insight and information that they need to proceed through the recruiting process. So Bonnie, you mentioned DCAT, you mentioned you work with student athletes. Could you just give a brief overview of what it is that DCAT does and kind of your approach to working with student athletes as well?
Sure. So again, working with Diamond College Advisory Team and us pairing with athletes and families is my main goal and role is to give each student athlete the tools and the support that they need to make this process their own, to make it unique to them. Right? We're not sort of cookie cutter of, okay, here's what everybody does. I spend a lot of time getting to know each student and helping them figure out what their priorities may be. Do they want to go to school in a city or a suburb or a rural area, only East Coast, anywhere in the country, kind of all the different things in between, and where you want softball to fit in your life, where you want academics to fit in your life, basically like what percentage of time you might be spending on those things. And so again, ours is a very customized program. It's one-on-one with each student, and we've had really some tremendous success, not only in softball but also on the baseball side. And you know, I'm very proud to say that there's players at all kinds of NESCAC schools and in the Ivies and in the Centennial and in the Liberty and playing in the Midwest. They're just it's really kind of neat for everybody to get to find their home, and it's a fun process. I certainly know that there's anxiety that goes with it. Like, are we doing the right things? Am I going to the right places? I want to get recruited. We'll cover some more of that, but it's been a pleasure for me to help players and their parents sort of reduce that anxiety, reduce the mystery to the process, and really feel like they have good ownership of where they're going and good direction for how they use their time and their energy.
Yeah, and one thing that we will talk a lot about tonight, and we have talked about on the first part of this webinar series as well, is the idea of being proactive and empowering student athletes to be the driver in the recruiting process. And that, I think, is key to the work that I've seen you do and the approach that I've seen you take with student athletes. So I just want to kind of emphasize that empowerment of student athletes to drive their recruiting process is so much in line with how we talk about it head first, how we talk about the recruiting process and how student athletes can best approach it. Now, working into the do's and don'ts, we're going to start with coach communication. And like I said, there's some do's and there's some don'ts. So first up, do personalize every communication touch point. This one, I really can't emphasize enough. That's why I put it first. That's why I talk about it a lot. It's so important that you personalize every touch point that you have with a college coach. The communication channel that often falls victim to not being personalized is email, right? You copy and paste the same email, or you send a BCC, or you send some kind of mass message to college coaches. It's really crucial that you personalize every email that you send to a college coach. One thing that I heard from a college coach a few years ago that resonated with me was, he takes time out of his day and does everything he can to reply to every email if it looks like it has been personally written to him. If you haven't gotten a response from him, it means that it probably didn't come across as personalized, and so he did not take the time out of his day to personalize a response to you. So if you aren't seeing action from your email, one thing to check on is, am I personalizing every touch point? And this means more than just getting the coach's name right. That's obviously super important, that you're addressing it to the right coach, at the right school, the right location, the right mascot, whatever, the right, season record, whatever it is. But it also means more than that. To me, it means also doing some research on the school and giving some indication of why you're interested in this program. It means if you send an email to Amherst that says, hey, I'm really interested in aerospace engineering, that's great. That's not what Amherst's strength is, right? Maybe you should be emailing Harvey Mudd about that. And so those are different things. You want to indicate some interest by saying, I'm interested in your school because of 1, 2, 3, and needs to be more in-depth and more personalized than just, I'm interested in your school because it's a great school and has a great softball program. That's true of every school that you're going to be reaching out to. So there need to be specific reasons that you are interested in this program. That's what I love to harp on for personalizing every touch point is, why am I interested in this program? Why is this coach getting this email from me right now? Another thing to keep in mind is you do want to create non-email touch points as well. Email is going to drive the bulk of your communication because it's free, because everybody has an email inbox, and because college programs generally list their coaches' email addresses on their website. So it's really kind of easy to do. But it also, because it's so easy, it can be a pretty crowded platform, right? And so a lot of college coaches have very crowded email inboxes. One of the ways that you can stand out as a student athlete is by creating non-email touch points. And this can be going old school, like sending a handwritten letter to the program, especially after you meet them face-to-face at a Head First showcase. You send a note saying, hey, coach, thank you so much for the time you took to talk to me about two-strike hitting approach. Super valuable. Really appreciate the time. Thank you. It can mean phone calls and texting when and where appropriate, which is going to kind of progress fairly naturally oftentimes from college coaches, where they say, hey, I'd love to hop on the phone, or they'll start texting you. And that's, obviously a point where you want to kind of transition some of these touch points. And then also it's new school things, right? It's, how are you using Twitter? How are you using social media? Are you DMing coaches? Are you tagging coaches and stuff? This doesn't mean fire off a million DMs for every single college program in the country, but it means that, if you put up a highlight video on your Twitter and you get a comment from a coach, yeah, slide into their DMs and send something saying, hey, coach, really, really interested in your school. Would love to continue the conversation. Thank you so much for taking a look at my video, right? So create kind of touch points across different platforms as well.
Sure. And so,
Bonnie, you want to talk a little bit about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
so I was just jumping right in. So, Max was talking about non-email touch points, and I would, further that by saying non-softball specific video touch points, right? You want to be able to show other things that you do as a student, as a person, other things that go on in your life. And that being, coaches do want to know more about you as a person, right? They're going to spend 4 or 5 years with you. They're going to be riding in buses. They're going to be having meals. Like, they want to know what makes you tick. They can evaluate your softball skills on a regular basis pretty quickly. They're pros. That's what their job is, but they do want to know more about you. And I'll give you a quick example. So back a few years back during the pandemic, we had some players who were kind of stuck for communication. They didn't know what to do. So there's this girl who lived in the country part of Maryland, and she took this awesome video of her dad was dropping the balls in the pitching machine with no screen, and she was out hitting in a hay field, and her black Labrador was out chasing the balls. Like that, every coach commented about that. And you don't have, if you don't have that, you don't have to do it. But another girl was taking grounders in her front yard, and just different things. You might also take some video of a volunteer opportunity that you do, or a family tradition, or anything else that gives coaches a little bit different look about you. Because as Max was saying, like, we want you to be very persistent and proactive. And I call it just giving them a little bit of taste of you on the brain in lots of different formats. So if Max is trying to be recruited, Max is going to give them a little taste of this and a little taste of that. So I think that those pieces, they just help you. It's just something different, right? Coaches see a video and they see swings and they see grounders. They're like, oh, another video. But if they see something different, or they see your little brother catching the balls at third base with the goofy hat on his head, it's real. It's real life. So find ways to be creative. And of course, like, one of the last do's is do please proofread. I know this from personal experience as a coach. In previous life, my last name was Flynn, so I was Coach Flynn when I was at Furman, and I would get some letters to, like, Coach Floyd, or Coach Blinn, and little things, but it's not me. So those things matter. And I certainly know from my own perspective, if I email after 10 o'clock at night, I should probably just leave it in draft, because that's when I make my most mistakes. I spell things wrong. I cut and paste and the things are in the wrong place. So, like, know your own habits. Take a little time for that, because these are the little things, paying attention to detail. Yeah, from time to time, we're going to make a mistake, no doubt. Do yourself a favor, though, and give yourself that time space that you need to proofread, or have your mom and dad proofread. That's cool. You're writing it. That's the main thing. But have another set of eyes to take a quick look at it, so that when it goes out, it is sharp.
And I think one thing to just double down on here is, like, the thing that I hear the most from coaches as well is, I got an email addressed to a coach at my rival school, right? Someone sent the wrong email to the wrong coach. It's personalized. It's a great email, but it went to the wrong school. And so double checking, name, subject line, name of school, who it's going to, all those things are super, super important. And this is where I think parents can play a pretty good supportive role, where the email should be written by the kids, right? College coaches are smart enough. They get enough emails from 17-year-old players that they know that reads very different than it does, an email from a lawyer who's been practicing for 30 years, right? So the email should come from the kids, but this is where parents can certainly step in and support and say, hey, can I be a second set of eyes to make sure that everything on this goes off without a hitch?
So jumping into the next part with the don'ts, right? You see the bullet point there: mass email or mail merge, or BCC, as Max mentioned before, where it goes to somebody, but there's like no title to it when you use, blind carbon copy. Coaches, again, they want to know that it's coming to them, head coach, assistant coach, right names, whoever that may be. And some players will email out of their platform, right? Perhaps like Sports Recruits is a good one to mention. A lot of people use that. It's a fantastic platform to house your video and to be able to quickly link stuff. If you email through there, some coaches won't open it because again, it's not personalized if it doesn't come from something specific. So I might just suggest that you get a dedicated email account, whatever, platform that it's on, but that you're just using for recruiting, like Bonnie Pettis class of 1990. So I know that that's my softball stuff. So be just, again, you've got to, you can use different drafts. You can cut and paste certain drafts, but I would not do big, just generalized blasts. And back in the day, we used to get papers in the mail from NCSA. I'm just going to say it, right? And I would get this stack of players from all over the country who did not have the SAT or GPA qualifications to come to Furman. And I used to print my practice plan on the other side of them. And I'd be reading practice, and they're like, Coach, that girl. I said, that girl can't come here. She's maybe great, but she can't come here. So the whole mass thing, shooting out to all kind of people, it doesn't work effectively. And then getting back to what we said at the beginning, when I work with players, I want you to be concentrating on the schools that fit your academic criteria, like it has the right major, it has the right minor, that you're cool with going to a school that has 1,200 students or 12,000 students. And okay, you're from Northern California, you're good with going all the way to school all the way over in Maine. Or you're in Texas and you want to get out of the heat and you want to go to the Northeast because you want to go somewhere cold. That's the common refrain that I have. So that's the other piece of it is I think when you're working with someone who can give you good direction, then you have a concentrated group of schools, 10, 15, 20, whatever it may be, and that group shrinks down as time goes on, and so that you don't feel like you have to email 75 coaches a week. You don't have to do that, for sure. So in the second portion of that, trying to read my bullet here. So in our program, we talk about the P's, right? Being proactive, being patient, and one of the other P's that fits in there is pester. Like, so you got to sort of dance that line between being proactive but not pestering or being pesky. And that comes into when you are sending out communications that there's some meaning or there's some reason, or we call it an excuse to reach out. So that, okay, you're specifically talking about your PSAT score. You're talking about you're sending your first quarter grades. Your team had like an awesome week. You went 3-0, 5-0, something, and it's a reason that you're reaching out to folks so that you are spreading these things out and you're not having to just feel like, okay, the only way for them to see me is if I just keep sending them stuff every week. To some degree, that can be a level of overexposure. Like they're like, oh, here comes another one of these. And if there's nothing in it, there's no substance to it. So be cool, be okay with the idea that you're going to spread them out and they're going to be periodic, but you do not have to do this every single week with kind of like fluff.
Yeah, I think one tough thing that I hear from student athletes on this is like there isn't a set, hard and fast rule to obey. It's like, well, if you email once a week, it's too much. If you email once a month, it's perfect, right? There's no kind of Goldilocks zone because it depends on the player, it depends on the coach, depends on where you are in the recruiting process. So there isn't kind of a heuristic, which is where, it takes some feel and you got to read the room a little bit. And the other thing that I generally say as the closest that I can come to a cheat code is you have to have a reason to be emailing them. It's not just, well, I said I'd email the coaches every Tuesday. I don't have anything to say, but I'm going to send them an email because it's Tuesday, right? If you have an updated schedule, updated video, updated SAT score, updated transcript, those can all be really good reasons. If you have a reason to email them, something to update them on, then it could be a good indication that maybe you should. Not always, and again, not kind of like that hard and fast rule, but it could be a good indicator when in doubt.
Good follow-up. And then, of course, don't give up in this process. It can be really frustrating and can make us feel nervous if you're sending something to your favorite top choice schools, this month and next month and another month after that, and you don't hear anything back. So we've alluded a little bit to. So there's certain times that Division One schools can't reply to any kind of email until September 1st of your junior year. They can respond with some camp information or say, I can't respond except for camp, and then that's it. Division three coaches can talk or respond to players really at any time. However, they don't have as many full-time staff. So it's not going to be the same as a Division One school that has 4 paid coaches. Very different on the Division three level. And then also to frame that, it's really important to understand what the timeline is that each of these coaches is working on. So, for example, a lot of the coaches they're part of the Head First stable, the top Division three schools in the country, they're still concentrating on class of 25. So if you're a 26 or a 27, doesn't mean they're not going to listen to you, but their prime focus is on this class of 25 going into the fall and into early decision. So, giving up as a 27 or a 26, or you're not hearing, like, that's okay. Like, it's not your time just yet. And going back to sort of just one great example, I had a player who was interested in a NESCAC school, and in their junior year, emailing a couple times in September, October, November, hey, coach, I'm not hearing anything back. I don't feel like there's anybody listening. I said, well, just keep writing as if they're listening. Keep the conversation going. You're just having a one-sided conversation, but pretend it's a two-sided. And then the new year rolls around, and this player, okay, now a junior, right in the spring semester, the coach from the favorite school calls up, I got all your emails. I see that you play hockey. That's cool. We're in a place where there's hockey. Like, this player was amazed that they were listening. So somebody's listening, and somebody's watching. So stick with it. And I am fully confident that there is a place for most everyone to play at some level of college softball with the right determination and the right mix of approaching the schools that are good fits for you from a softball point and good fits for you from an academic point. So be patient, don't give up. And one last example, I had a player who had an injury during spring of junior year, really wasn't fully healed until middle of summer, late summer. They were still taking visits in September of senior year and into October of senior year, and then landed at a great place. Like, that was the patient part as well. Of her process went, 3-4 months deeper than everybody else's, and yet she's happy to be where she's going.
Yeah, those are such useful and such helpful examples, and I think you really nailed that. It also can be so difficult for players who are targeting this sort of program, who are sending emails, and it feels like they're going into this void, and they're watching people around them start to commit, whether they're looking at, schools like Oklahoma or Cal or UCLA, like schools that do tend to move earlier on the recruiting front. It's so important, especially for players who are targeting these selective admission schools, to not give up. The process moves later. The coaching staffs tend to be a little bit smaller at many of these. So, as Bonnie said, don't give up. You are going to see people around you start to commit. That doesn't mean that there's no hope for you. It doesn't mean that it's over. It means that it's not your turn yet, as Bonnie said, or, there are some other kind of pieces of the puzzle that are settling out. One final don't here that personally I feel very strongly about is don't ignore or blow off any coaches who email you. I think it's super important to keep an open mind in the recruiting process. You might have never heard of Grinnell or Denison, but as you learn more, it might turn out that it's the perfect school, it's the perfect fit, offers everything that you're looking for in the college experience. If you ignored or blew off emails from those coaches earlier on, it's going to be really tough to get to climb that hill again, right? So even if you think it's a school that you're not interested in, do the research and still reply, still be cordial, for 2 reasons. One is you don't know how your recruiting process is going to twist and turn. And in a few months, it might turn out that, oh, I learned more about that school and I'm really interested. And that's obviously something you want to kind of keep in mind, is keep that open mind and learn more about schools. The other thing that's important to mention here, I think, is there's a lot of relationships between college coaches that you may or may not know about. These coaches, a coach at an Ivy League school and a coach at NESCAC school and a coach at a Centennial Conference school, they might have all worked together or in the same staff or played in the same program, or all these different relationships that exist, and they do talk to each other, right? So maintaining a good reputation and good relationships with these coaches that reach out to you is super important, because they do talk to each other about the folks that they're recruiting oftentimes, especially if they're not in the same conference, but they do have good relationships. And so that's another thing really important thing to keep in mind, I think, is don't burn any bridges in your own process, and also on the relationship front as well. Next up, we're moving into the do's and don'ts of getting recruiting exposure. The first do here, actively seek out and plan for opportunities that give you targeted exposure to the schools that are on your list. Bonnie, I'd love for you to take this, because I know you work so closely with your student athletes about setting this plan. They all look different, but it's important to have one. Like, what do you think about in terms of setting this recruiting plan as you work with student athletes?
Sure. Well, I like the sub point there, which is everyone's plan is going to be different. And so we want to be able to get exposure at mass exposure or larger exposure events with multiple schools earlier in the process, say sophomore year, junior year, because it's more bang for your buck. And Max hasn't given me any cues to say this, but there really is no better place or other place besides Head First where you can go to one place and you can get 30 coaches in one place and get to talk to them. It just doesn't exist in the same format. There may be some, but it's a great format, and it's a successful way to do that. So again, you want mass exposure. You're also going to have times where you will go onto their campus, maybe in a summer camp, a fall camp, winter camp. Winter camps are huge. Quite honestly, it's a big evaluation point in junior year, because, okay, they saw you out in the summer after sophomore year. Now, 6 months later, they're going to see you in January or February. And these are all the Northeast, particularly the Northeast programs, because they have indoor facilities. You're not going to do camp outside in Maine in February. So these are some ways to see the campus when it's full with student athletes, excuse me, and with school in session. And okay, do I really want to go to a certain, any given geography when it's the middle of a particular, season? So I think that that's a way to also balance out of, you're going to have mass exposure, and then as things funnel down in your process through junior year, summer after junior year, you're looking at, excuse me, coaches being able to see you live in live competition. That's also an important aspect of this, not just camps, not just clinics, but in the most competitive travel ball that they can see you in or that you have access to. And there was one other piece that just ran away from me. I know it. You get later in the process, certainly into the summer after junior year, it's very important that you also get in front of the decision maker. Most likely that's going to be the head coach. So it's important to make sure that you have some evaluation points, not only just with assistants, but also with head coaches.
Yeah, and I think all that is absolutely key. And to double click on something that we will continue to have mentioned a number of times already and will continue to, is actively, proactively, right? The key here is everyone's plan look different, but it's important to have one. I think that without having a plan, without being proactive, the risk is that you feel this FOMO and you start getting dragged across the country to all these different things that may or may not be right for your recruiting process. So you do want to set a plan, both from a budgeting standpoint. You don't have the time, energy, and money to be able to chase all these opportunities across the country, but also you want to vet these opportunities to make sure that they're right for the schools that you're looking at. So key here is actively seek out and plan, and proactively attack those opportunities that you do have, just to kind of double down on that proactivity piece. The opposite of that, don't be passive. You have to put yourself in the driver's seat of this, which is something that, Bonnie, I know you work a lot with your student athletes about. Is, it's not you driving the process for them. It's not mom and dad driving the process for them. It's not brother or sister driving the process. They need to be in the driver's seat of their recruiting process. And there's no secret spell or magic wand for recruiting. The closest thing I can think of for it is proactivity. You have to go out, have that plan, attack the plan, execute against it. and really chase those opportunities, put yourself in a position to succeed, that's the closest you can come to having, the Jack and the Beanstalk, the Goldilocks recruiting, I would say.
Sure. I would tag on.
Yeah.
Sorry, I tag on to that, Max. Sort of one of the phrases that I like to use with families is, again, I mentioned already, giving the tools and the support to be successful, but also for you to recruit yourself to the schools of your choice. And that really is, in my experience, an approach that makes it proactive, but also helps students feel like, yes, I'm doing all of these steps. Yes, these are, I'm doing everything in my control to make myself available to these people. Because again, I've seen it for 25, 30 years. Great players, even one I worked with about 4 years ago on a call said, oh, well, I'm just waiting for them to come. I'm waiting for the coaches. Where are they? And I said, okay, I understand that, but they're not coming to your one high school game in the middle of Iowa, the middle of anywhere, right? Everybody's seasons are at the same time. So that's why we have this proactive approach, the approach of you recruiting yourself, determining with some outside help, what are good, reasonable choices for me? And why are these good, reasonable choices for me? So that it's a very, it's a targeted approach.
Yeah. And I think that the phrase that comes to mind that just, if I'm good enough, they'll find me, right? They'll find the players that are good enough. This may have been true at some schools in some contexts in some years, but it's not a plan, right? And even if it was, even if you are in the top 0.1% of players who are truly good enough that no matter where you go, a coach is going to find you, my question would be, okay, if you're passive voice being found, are you being found by the program that's right for you? Even if you are in that 0.1% of players, I would still say you have to go out there and be proactive and not be passive and let yourself be found in the passive voice, because you want to make sure that you're chasing the opportunities that give you access to the programs that are right for you from a holistic fit standpoint. They're right for the education, they're right for the academics, they're right for the location, all of the pieces of a dynamics of a college fit. And then one thing here, and we talked a little bit about kind of travel ball tournaments before earlier, but don't rely purely on large format tournaments or travel ball alone to deliver your recruiting. Those play a really important piece in player development and having great experiences, and they are, certainly recruited by college coaches. It's not the only avenue to chase. And I think that especially for student athletes who are looking at these sort of selective admission schools, it's oftentimes not the most efficient or not the best way to get these recruiting outcomes as well. These large format tournaments, again, are great. We talk to Triple Crown, we talk to Zoom into June, we talk to the Sparkler. Like, they're great experiences to be going to with your travel ball teammates and have a really competitive atmosphere, play some great softball, and sometimes some coaches are watching. The challenges of them are, A, it's not targeted for the schools that you're looking at. And also, for some of them, the challenge is they're spread across a pretty wide geographical area. So are you playing on the right field at the right time with the right coaches watching? That's some magic that has to happen for that to take place in a lot of these tournaments. So relying on them is dangerous. If they're your only plan to getting exposure to your target schools, I would caution against that and instead encourage you to seek other opportunities that give more targeted, more proactive, more reliable, and more multi-context exposure to the schools that are on your list as well. Headed into the do's and don'ts of showcases and tournaments. Obviously, we run showcases. This is something that I think a lot about and that I talk with student athletes a lot about. So one thing that I see student athletes do sometimes is come in and try to play a totally different game. I always say, play your game when you come into a showcase, when you're at a tournament. When you're in these highly pressurized situations, the best thing you can do as a player is trust and fall back on all that hard work and preparation that you have done, and use that, right? If you're a contact hitter, today's not the day at a head first showcase or at the Sparkler to think that you're going to go 6 for 12 hitting 7 home runs, right? That's not the day for it. You want to go out and play your game. if you're a control pitcher with great off speed who mixes up speeds and mixes up movements and mixes up locations, do that. Today's not going to be the first day that you're going to throw 73, right? That's not the right plan to set yourself up for success. So play your game and trust the hard work. The other thing that I think a lot of players do is they try to deny that it's a pressurized situation. They say, I don't feel stressed. I don't feel nervous. No. Because that is something that I think, culturally we tend to do, is deny it. Rather than do that, there's a lot of social science suggesting to reframe that as a positive instead. Reappraise the stress-based emotions, and that actually increases level of performance by saying, yes, you know what? This is a pressurized situation. It is pressurized because I value this so highly, because it is so important to me. And the things that I'm feeling are here. They're real. They're an indicator of my excitement. They're an indicator that I am ready for what's ahead of me. So reappraising those stress-based emotions is something that we talk a lot about at camp to help players be set up for success. But I would give it here just as when you're at a tournament, you're at a showcase, when that coach is watching that at bat, think back and trust the work that you've done, and also try to reframe that as a positive the best you can. Understand that you are feeling stressed. Don't deny it. Lean into it and understand where it's coming from. Also at a showcase, I would say do interact and engage face-to-face with college coaches. One of the things that we do that is unique at Head First is we have opportunities during camp to engage directly and to have conversations directly with college coaches. On day one, we have a coach-led positional practice. College coaches working with outfielders, working with catchers, working with middle infielders. And it's a great opportunity to get hands-on and meet these coaches, see what their coaching style is. On day two, there's a coach connection period where it's a dedicated time where the only point is for players to go around and shake some hands, introduce themselves to coaches if they haven't already, and really get to know them. Like, introduce themselves, talk about their program, talk about who they are, where they're coming from. And then the other thing is we have coaches on the field in the dugouts. So yes, there's formalized parts of the programming that are meant to encourage and facilitate this direct engagement. There's also a lot of organic opportunities. The unique thing about a Head First showcase is that coaches aren't separated from players by chain link. And so it's a really great opportunity. So please do take advantage of that opportunity. Make a list of coaches that you want to talk to, and then, systematically go down and check them off and say, great, I talked to Muhlenberg. Now I want to make sure I talk to Union. I talked to Yale. I want to make sure I go talk to Harvard. So make a plan, be proactive and stick to it, and take advantage of that opportunity. But don't, and we touched on this, so I think move pretty quickly, but don't try to play someone else's game. Don't try to go out and do something just because you think it's what coaches want to see. Again, lean back and trust the work that you've put in. And don't miss the opportunity. Don't avoid the opportunity to speak to coaches one-on-one and face-to-face while you are able to. There are players that come to every session of Head First who would much rather face someone throwing 75 from the circle than go up and introduce themselves to a college coach. And believe me, I understand that. I was that kid. I totally get it. But we're there to help. If you're at a Head First event, we're there to help. If you're at a different event, I think it's really important to think about taking advantage of that opportunity. Yes, it's going to be stressful. Yes, it might be scary. And yes, you might rather do a million other things. The easy thing is to avoid that conversation and, well, I got to go hydrate for the game, or I got to go get ready, or, there's a million excuses that you can create for yourself to avoid that difficult conversation. Don't do that, right? Take advantage of that opportunity. Bonnie, here, I'd be curious you have a lot of players who attend Head First, attend other showcases, attend other tournaments. When you're preparing student athletes for those sorts of settings, what are the things that you talk through? How do you work with them to help get them ready for their performance, for their recruiting approach, these things that are so important?
Yeah. So tagging on, the things that you've already mentioned are absolutely things that we talk about. Just taking the last one you talked about and give you a more specific example. So we see, Head First is a 2-day event, or someone's going to a camp that's a 1-day thing, is setting that priority of, okay, here are the people on your list. Let's prioritize who you have not talked to yet, who you need to make that introduction. Let's make sure they're on the list for day one. And we can sort of mix and match as we need to, but maybe you're going to try to talk to 10 coaches. So you can't really do it all in one day. Let's prioritize who you want to be on day one, who on day two. Then once you get your schedule and you see which coaches are in your dugout, on your field, whatever, then you can adjust. A specific thing, a player that I'm working with right now who's been to head first and going to head first, just is like you're describing, which what you've already described, Max, is just someone who's not as comfortable. Sort of, they're not good with small talk. They love to talk facts and theories and things, but they're just not comfortable with small talk. So we talked about that dugout opportunities, like saying it's not face to face. You can be side by side with somebody and just ask them
Mhm.
something about the game or something that they mentioned, and that's again a little bit more organic. It's you don't have to like talk about the weather or how was their flight. Like it's something about what's going on in front of you. And that was really good for this person to give them sort of a warm up. And then, quite frankly, we did practice Zooms. I had 2 Zooms with this player
Mm.
before they went to head first and did some practice, like how they're going to talk to, like you said, Muhlenberg or Union or whomever. And when they got to head first, then we'd already done it. We've already been through it. We worked through the silence. We worked through the awkward. Like I said to this person, I'm okay with silence. We're going to practice this and it's okay. And
We're gonna practice this being weird so that we get that. Let's get the reps in.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I do talk for a certain living, but I have my times too where I'm just like can't find the right words or I say something dumb or whatever. Like, but I survived all those things. So it's looking at how do we make the like push the recruiting ball forward one more step, depending on wherever you are in the process. You're a 25, a 26, a 27. It's going to look different for each of you. I have a 25 who, she's got to be a lot more aggressive at this weekend at Zoom into June. She will be contacting this coach ahead of time to say, Coach, I know you're coming. Can we set up a 5-minute, 10-minute face-to-face meeting? Like she needs to make the most of this coach coming from the other side of the country to being there. She don't want to miss that opportunity, and she needs to because she's a 25, really different than a 27. So it just really depends. But everything is just trying to move it forward a little bit more and get out of your comfort zone. And as you said, there will be feelings that go with it. It's because it matters to you, and that's why we can get
Yeah.
anxious about it sometimes. That's very natural to happen.
Next up here, the do's and don'ts of general recruiting. As I mentioned, this is kind of a catch-all, a bucket that just kind of covers some of the other things that we want to make sure we cover. Um, and first off, and we talked a lot about this on part one, so I do think it's worth rehashing though, because it is so important. Is when you are looking at your school list, it's really key that you are selecting for and assessing for overall and holistic fit, school first, softball second, and that you're researching schools thoroughly with an open mind. So as we said on part one, the point isn't what is the name of the school that I'm going to or what league do they belong in. It's I'm looking for a school that's X hours away from home, that is Y size, that offers Z major. And then I start to assess what are the schools that fit these qualities and fit in this category that I'm looking for, fit the experience that I'm looking for at the college level. So that is what I would forever harp on, is selecting for overall and holistic fit. And then Bonnie, I'd love, kind of take from here. I know you talk a lot about time, and so would love to pass off the rest of these to you.
Yeah, sure. So thinking about being patient as well, right? We certainly want to be patient. I mentioned that every graduating class has a certain time frame. Again, it's not to say that coaches are just going to take your email and never look at it if you're a class of 27 or class of 26, but understand that this um, process in the high academic space is the longest process of anybody's, right? All of these fantastic schools that you're interested in cannot make any true final decisions until the summer after your junior year, after you can present your full transcript, test scores, so on and so forth. So it's a longer process. It's going to be longer than probably most of the other people in your travel team. And so with that, with being patient and knowing that you have a plan and moving through it, and that your timing is not always the same as the coach's timing, my best advice that I can offer to you and your parents is put some cotton in your ears, put some blinders on your on the sides, and just know that you are choosing the path that is correct with the timing that is correct. And as I mentioned, gave you some examples of that, already, that the timing will unfold, right, when the timing is right for your turn. And then the last piece, own your process. Just kind of capping up everything that we've mentioned about being proactive, being persistent, and then now being patient, but knowing that you have a plan, knowing that you start with a big list, and then as you go visit some different places, you add some schools, you take some other schools off. After you visit, you're like, it's just not, I don't know, I like this one better than that one, so let's take this one off. And then as you move further and further through that process, you know that you've left no stones unturned. You have made yourself available to coaches. You have gone to receive or put yourself in different exposure opportunities. And when you do all of these things, this is something that helps you know and helps you be in that driver's seat, right? You're not, as Max said, you're not waiting to be found, but we are recruiting ourselves to these places of choice. So that's, and 99.5% of the students that I work with, they will do these things, and occasionally some parents will kind of chime in and say, like, I know I'm probably not supposed to be doing this. I said, yes, meaning, running their social media or setting up the emails. But again, it is your process. Your folks have already been to school, maybe been to school, not been to school, but it's yours. It's going to be your time with this coach, with this team, with this school. So do all of those pieces that we're laying out to you so that you can know, yeah, I did all of the other things to get myself here. I earned this spot. And then, one other piece sort of tying all of that in together is don't compare your process to those of your teammates. I already gave you that example. And there will be juniors that in September or October, like, they get an offer, whatever that means is different at every place. And they're wrapped up and ready to go. Or some players they're going to take the first full offer that they get because that's what's best for them, and that's maybe what their circumstances require. So just understand, it's a longer process, it's a harder process, and even for others that you may have other peers going through the high academic space, everybody's is a little bit different, and it's very hard to say, well, I got a hit off her and she struck out her, so the transitive property does not apply either, like, or they're recruiting her and I just rocked her and hit a bomb. There's just so many different pieces that go into how coaches pick these 4 or 5 players for the whole year, and out of all of the thousands of great players in the country. So it's you'll drive yourself crazy if you try to compare. So using the phrase that I've heard, I can't remember who exactly it's attributed to, but comparison is the thief of joy. So keep your joy and try not to compare.
Bonnie, we've said, don't be passive, be proactive a number of times. And I still don't, I would not say that we've said it too much. So I think this is one final time, but don't be passive in the process. You need to go out and attack it. Again, you don't want to be found. You want to find yourself in the process. So one final plug for be proactive, don't be passive. The number one bullet point, as close to a rule as I would say we could make in the high academic recruiting space, would be just that: be proactive, don't be passive.
All right. So another thing that's also common, like, there will be rejection in this process, and we want to advise you not to fear the rejection. Um, it's a growing part of life. We all like to be picked. When I was a basketball referee, I wanted to be picked for the postseason. I didn't want to be rejected. Like, I wanted to be good enough, but sometimes the numbers just didn't work out in a particular league or so on. So I've experienced that as an adult. And I think as a teenager, it's, again, as Max has already mentioned, sort of being able to reframe the fear is, we may fear some things because it matters to us. And you're going into a very, very competitive academic process. You're putting yourself out there to say, I want to be one of these 4 or 5 people you pick, and your coaches are starting with 100 and then 50 and then 20. So you're putting yourself in a very competitive pool. And I think what we want to get across is to, again, be your authentic self, play your game, play aggressive, um, be your full self there, and not do your best not to worry so much about, well, will they like this, or will this fit, or what if I fall on my face? You know what? It's going to be okay. You will be all right. And I'm going to steal one of Max's lines. We've been doing this together for a while. So sometimes no is the second best answer you can get, right? No is information. So when you're getting a yes, we all want to get yeses, but when I get a no from a job interview or from someone that I work with, and or they listen to me and they're like, nope, don't, this is not a good match. It's not great, but it helps me move to the next person on the list. And it will help you move to the next one so that you don't miss some of those other opportunities that are out there.
This, I think, comes back to, again, that if you're good enough, they will find you. I think that that myth has been pervasive as long as I can remember in the recruiting space. I know that I heard it when I was going through the recruiting process, and I think fell victim to it a little bit. So I think that it's something that I certainly want to make sure we constantly caution players against. Don't assume that coaches and programs will find you just because, even if you are in that 0.1%, don't assume that they're going to find you. And for the vast majority of players out there, it's really dangerous to sit back and just say, well, someone will tell someone and they'll tell someone else that I'm good enough to play at their program and get connected. It's really, really dangerous. It goes back to proactivity, but I think it's even more pointed just because that phrase, if you're good enough, they'll find you, I think is so pervasive in the recruiting space. And I just want to make sure we really strongly caution against that and advocate for that proactivity. And then I think one final thing that, again, I feel very strongly about is don't leave anything on the table. And I say this because the inclination for, especially for teenagers who fear rejection, as Bonnie just very eloquently spoke to, is if you leave yourself some excuses, then if it doesn't turn out successfully, you're not as vulnerable. It's not that I wasn't good enough. It's that I didn't really try, right? You leave yourself an out. You leave yourself an escape plan, which I think is really potentially toxic and potentially damaging to your recruiting, because you need to go out there and really leave everything on the table. You can't have any regrets about your recruiting process. And yes, this means you're going to be vulnerable. If you give it your absolute best shot and you've done everything that you can, and then you still hear a no, that does hurt, right? That never feels good, but it's really important. I think that is a much better case scenario than leaving yourself these excuses, leaving yourself this cop out that you might have at the end of the process without knowing where it could have gone. So I think that between those two things, I am always going to choose being vulnerable. And I would encourage student athletes to always lean towards being vulnerable, put it all out there. If it doesn't work out, that is going to hurt, but that's a better outcome. And you will still engage this recruiting process much more critically than you would if you just thought, well, maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, right? Without proactivity, assuming that coaches will find you with that fear of rejection, being passive. With that, we can head into the Q&A. And I know we've covered a lot of ground. I know it's 9:26 East Coast time, and we said 9:30. So I know that we'll stay on and answer some questions, but we're recording this. We'll be emailing it out. If at any point you have to jump to go watch Texas, Oklahoma, like I know Bonnie wants to do, and I know I want to do, certainly feel free to jump off. You have to study for a chemistry final or make dinner. But we'll be on answering questions as long as there are any questions to be answered. As I start to organize the questions that have come in and are coming in, well, first, I guess, to send a question, and I know some of you have found this already, but in the questions tab and go to webinar, just type it in there, fire it my way. I'm going to start to compile them and kind of think about who to phrase them out to and kind of organize them. As I do that, Bonnie, you mentioned this video eval offer. Could you give a bit more details about how, what, why, who kind of this
Sure.
offer applies to, and how to send stuff your way?
Sure, sure. So something that we want to offer to anybody who's on this webinar or who hears it later, is that you can send your video clips to me, and I will be happy to do it like a no strings, but a detailed evaluation. We'll set up a time to talk on the phone, and for me to be able to give you that outside um, observation and experience to say, hey, this is where I think these are the things that I think that are going great. Here's where I think that puts you on track, or what your projectability may be, right? Everybody wants to know, okay, I love all these schools, but how do I know if I'm fit at that school? If I'm at the Ivy League level, if I'm at the Patriot, if I'm at the NESCAC, if I'm at the wherever, right? There's tons and tons of conferences. And that's my bread and butter. That's what I do. And seeing players and being able to give you that feedback, which can help you, guide your process. And again, you don't need just under the what to include. It does not need to be your, scripted or your edited, or, someone else did it for you. Just game clips, cage clips, something easy and simple. You can just send it to my email, which is listed here, dcatsoftball@gmail. And if you would send them to me before July 1st, because we're all hopping into the showcase and travel season. I will be in California next week at Head First, but I'll get back to you. We'll set up a time and we'll talk about it over the phone and sort of be able to go over that with you. Again, I see 750 players a summer, evaluating everybody through Head First. So I can give you some indications of based on what I've seen, and again, players that I've worked with and where they have landed and where they've garnered the most interest, be able to give you a little bit of feedback on that.
Awesome. Thank you, Bonnie. And thank you for extending that invitation, because I know that one thing that we talked about on part one, a really good place to start with the recruiting process is getting a third party kind of qualified, informed evaluation, so that you can start to set some of the boundaries and some of the expectations and say, here's where I should be looking. This is a reach. This is a stretch, as I know Bonnie kind of talks about on the softball side. Like, here are the softball safeties, the softball fits, the softball reaches. So getting that sense early on is super, super helpful. A couple great questions have come in. The first one I'm going to answer is it too early for a freshman, sophomore? Like, we've talked about kind of the class of 2025 and, kind of being on time for some of these high academic D3s and these D1s. Is it too early for a freshman or a sophomore to start the process? And to that, I would say definitely not. I mean, I think that one thing, we see a lot of rising seniors come through our program. We also see a lot of rising juniors, rising sophomores, and rising freshmen come through our showcases every summer. And the key part here is, even if it's not, your turn, as Bonnie said earlier, even if they're still focused on a different class, or they don't have the full academic profile that they need to move forward with you yet, it still helps to build that relationship. So getting exposure to these programs, getting on their radar early, absolutely does benefit. But it's important to kind of keep in mind, it doesn't mean that if you come as a rising sophomore into a Head First camp in August, that then by September 1st you'll be committed, right? The timeline is still gonna be longer, but getting on their radars now lets you build the foundation for that relationship with that coach. And as you move forward, which is super, super key in that recruiting process, it also gives coaches a sense of your development. That's the other aspect that repeat and kind of early exposure can help give, is a coach sees you as a 14-year-old, as a 15-year-old, as a 16-year-old, and as a 17-year-old. They now have a bunch of dots that they can connect and say, all right, here's this player's trajectory, and here's where they're headed as a player. Bonnie, anything to add there in terms of kind of the timing for some of these younger folks, these 26s, 27s, who are starting to engage this process?
Sure. I mean, I absolutely agree with all of the points that you just laid out there. Because again, from a coaching standpoint, being able to see a player either at 1 year intervals or at 6 month intervals, will show me, where their skills are progressing. And that's kind of what we want to see, because coaches are in the business of looking at 16 to 17-year olds and seeing and projecting where they'll be 1.5 years from now before they step on a college field, and then 4 years out after that. Like that's sort of what their skill is in looking at that. And so being able to track those skills is important. I think another piece of starting the process earlier is it allows players to visit some different campuses with really like low stakes. You can go to Best of Boston, see a bunch of different schools, and you can see if you like Harvard or you like BU or you like Tufts. Like, you can visit other places. You can sample and see a lot of different style campuses. You can also get to know what these coaches are like, their coaching styles. Everyone's really different. So with more exposure points, you will be able to just gain more information really about how that program works, how that ticks, whether it's in a head first setting or others, or that you're just going to go watch some games in your area, or you're going to go watch clips online, like, that you're going to educate yourself about what's going on out there. And then I think too, really, I would also say the great emphasis for freshmen and sophomore can also be on their skill development. And okay, if I go to an event, I can see how I stack up against other peers or those that are one or two classes ahead of me. Are there big gaps in my skills? And okay, looking ahead, this is what she does. She's being recruited, or she's a senior, rising senior. Wow, okay, that's where I need to be. It's a good place to gauge yourself and have some checkpoints in there.
Absolutely. I love that addition of kind of the two-way fit. Like, coaches want more information about you. You as a player should also be seeking more and more information about coaches and about their schools. So the more chances you have to engage with them, the better sense they have of you, and also the better sense you can build of them. I think that's super, super key, because that coach fit is a really important piece. It's not the be all end all, but it's a really important piece of assessing your fit in college as well. Yes, it's about the school. Yes, it's about the program. That coach relationship is a really important one to kind of tag in there too. I love that. Next question that I'm going to toss straight to you, Bonnie. I have thoughts that I might tag in with, but that I'm going to talk straight to you is, I'm getting camp invites. I'm whatever, there's stuff that I'm getting from college coaches. How do I assess if a coach is genuinely interested in me and or recruiting me? Like, how do I know if a coach emails me, are they interested? If they text me, are they interested? How do I start to assess when I am legitimately being recruited by these programs that I'm interested in?
Sure. Generally, if you're getting a camp invitation that is very generic, it's just like the flyer, or it's a we're having this thing, because you've been to their website, you've signed in as a, filled out the student athlete questionnaire, or you've been to one of their camps before. It's pretty general. And just as a quick statement about camps is, you will get lots of them, and you do not have to go to all of them, and you can't. There's not enough time. There's not enough money. I don't care if you have a private plane. There's just not enough time. So trying to gauge that a little bit and saying, if I go, what's the benefit of this, and or do I might even interested in this school, because you'll get invitations from places that you just aren't necessarily interested in. The way that you'll know if you're being recruited or when you're being recruited is that you're getting personalized responses to your emails, like, hey, thanks for sending this. I'm super glad that you got a on your last chemistry test, and that you're going to do model UN. We have a lot of players who like something that is truly personalized. When coaches offer their number to text them, there are a few coaches that I know that do that. Not a lot, but a few. That means they want to open up these lines of communication. If a coach emails you and says they'd like to arrange to set up a phone call or a Zoom, that is certainly a demonstrated level of interest. And know that coaches start with a pool. I don't know what the number is. It's different for every school, but a big pool. And then as time progresses, that gets a little bit more narrow and a little bit more narrow. So again, going into summer after junior year, coaches have a short list and players have a short list. Kind of know these things match up. So again, it's going to be phone calls, requests for phone calls. It may be like an invitation to a camp. So for example, I had a player this winter who had the back and forth with a school. The school was having their winter camp, but the kid got a personalized invitation. We'd love to have you on campus. We're having this clinic on this day, but we'd also love you to stay over and go to class on Monday and go to, have lunch with the players. Like that's recruiting. They want you there. It's more than just, hey, come to the camp and we're going to take your money.
Yeah.
That is a
Yeah.
recruiting situation.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely perfect. And I would like distill it down to personalized message and personalized channel are the two kind of like the matrix of assessment. If it's a highly personalized message that engages the details of what you said or your highly personalized details, great sign. Doesn't mean you're committed to the program yet, but it is a really good sign, as Bonnie mentioned. And then personalized channel. If it's just email, that's fine. If it's a personalized message, if it's text, phone call, other things, if the more one-off and the more effort some of those channels take, as well as the message itself takes, both those are kind of key indicators in their level of interest. So message, channel, the more personal, the better. The more personal, the more genuine the interest is. I think final question that we got, we are a few minutes over, which, I appreciate everybody sticking with us. And I'm going to the question came in and it's a great one. And then I'm also want to kind of explore the area from which it comes, I think, which is a rich area as well. So if you see that a coach has started following you on Twitter or X, do you recommend emailing that coach directly to introduce yourself, share your profile, your videos, etc.? I think, and Bonnie, please feel free to tag in here. If you're interested in that school, yeah, you should definitely send them an email. And that follow on Twitter, again, could be a sign of interest. They could have gone through and just, followed everybody that was tagged, that had tagged them in something or whatever the case may be. I think that it's potentially a good sign. And if a school that have no interest in attending follows you, no, I don't think you necessarily need to go out of your way to send them an email with all of your information. But if it's a program that you're interested in, yes, there's no harm in sending them that email, understanding that, as Bonnie has mentioned a couple times, depending on your grad year, there might be limits to what they're able to send back. They can follow you on Twitter if you're 2026. They might not be able to send you personalized recruiting specific information. They might say in response to that email that you send, awesome, thank you so much, I can't talk to you. Or here's our camp information and that's it. Bonnie, anything to add there in terms of like that? I think that social media and recruiting is such a rich space, which I'd be interested in digging into a little bit more. But in terms of this case in particular, somebody follows you on Twitter. What do you say for next step for those student athletes?
Sure. I would, agree with, the points that Max has laid out and say, yes, it's a prime opportunity to engage with that coach personally, whether it's the head coach or the assistant or just the general, head first softball university. It's a way to engage with them. And I would take advantage of that opportunity. It's there. It's kind of a freebie. So I think that that's a great way to kind of break the ice with some folks. But in general, what I would say about the communication space, and we're having this evolving conversation. And this is what I want to ask the coaches this summer. And this is what I want players to ask coaches is, how do you feel about social media in recruiting? How do you want to hear from me in this way? Do you like it when you're one of 10 teams that have been tagged? Because, sitting behind the backstop, sitting behind home plate, I hear some of those things. And some coaches are like, hey, great, I'm one of 15 schools. Like I know that's the nature of how that platform works, but it is less personalized when there's 15 people tagged in it, so I think that's a great question to pose to coaches. Is this a format that you would like to hear from me? And how would you like me, and how do you feel about that, coach? Just ask them. They will give you answers for sure. And I think they'd be pretty psyched to be engaged and asked about it rather than just be flooded with stuff.
Right, rather than assuming one thing or the other. It is so interesting. So we run camps on the baseball side as well, and I had this conversation with the Yale recruiting coordinator recently about Twitter in particular. And for him, for their program, it's absolutely a main point of contact for them. They want athletes to follow them. They want to follow athletes. They want you to tag them in videos. They're going to go in and look at your videos. and there I think kind of not at one end of the spectrum, because I think there are probably more kind of power users on that front, but relative to their size and relative to their coaching staff, like they're towards one end of the spectrum in terms of using social media pretty heavily. There are also going to be programs that aren't interested in using it or don't have the time and resources to be able to use it as effectively or as heavily. So I think that there is kind of an individualized part of this, both for players who have varying and relative levels of comfort around social media and around posting their videos on their Twitter, whatever it is, but then also around programs who use it very differently as well. So Bonnie, I think you nailed that. I mean, I think that like understanding that there's going to be different preferences and then asking coaches what their preference is, I think you're rarely going to go wrong. If a coach does follow you, great. That's probably a good indicator that they're interested in using Twitter as a platform in their recruiting. So maybe you can, use that for that program. And then for other programs, you need to find other ways to learn about what their contact preferences are, how they use Twitter, how they use social media in their own recruiting. Mm-hmm. I agree though, Bonnie. I think it's a space that's constantly changing. Different programs use it different ways. And, it's kind of constantly evolving on how student athletes use it and how coaches that do use it. And this is something that like I've been talking to coaches about now for a couple of years, and it's constantly changing. And I'm super interested in pursuing and having these conversations and asking coaches, how are you currently using Twitter, right? And the answer is always different. It's always interesting. So from selfishly, from my perspective, I'm really interested in this question. I also think that for student athletes, it's a good one to ask coaches as well.
Yeah. And it's, quite honestly, in this moment, it's something other than, are you recruiting my position? What do you need? Like, it's a different, like, not everybody's asking that. So if you're hearing this on the webinar, you got an in to ask something different from the 10 people that are standing in line, you're going to ask something different. So another quick anecdote that I would use to wrap that up is I follow lots of different teams, lots of different coaches. But I do follow Chris Herman from Williams, the head coach there. And she's super big on culture and displaying your intellectual curiosity. And so one of her posts not so long ago was said, hey, as a student athlete, can you at least try to put together two, I shouldn't put it that way. It was, I believe you have the ability to put together 2 or 3 original sentences. Please do that when you reach out to me rather than just the, hey, here's my video, or, what are you looking for, coach? And it's apt because yeah.
So which again, like it's some of the same, I wouldn't say problem, but some of the same question marks around coach communication are now, they apply across platform, right? Just because you're doing it on Twitter doesn't mean you don't need to personalize that message. Just because you're doing it on Instagram doesn't mean that you can now do that mass email BCC type strategy, right? So the same principles still apply, whether it's email or Twitter or text message, like whatever it is, it still should be personalized. It still should be proofread. It still should do the research on the program beforehand. So some of these same principles apply, but the addition and different use cases for these different platforms is super fascinating as players and coaches kind of try to evolve into what is the least crowded, what is the most useful, where am I seeing the most value. I mean, and great anecdote from Coach Herman. I mean, I think that is totally on brand from a very thoughtful, very culture focused coach. Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. That's awesome. All right. And with that, I know we're a few minutes over, and I appreciate everybody sticking with us. This is absolutely and certainly not your first, last, or only chance to get your questions answered by either the Head First team or by Bonnie and the DCAT team. So if you do have questions about your recruiting process, about showcase camps, about DCAT, feel free. I left this up on the screen so you could take down our contact information. Send us an email at showcase@headfirstcamps.com. Give us a call at that number. Visit our website, take a look at our Twitter and Instagram to keep in touch with what things are going on. And then also certainly take a look at the Diamond College Advisory website. Email Bonnie, especially if you're doing that, the video eval offer, which one final plug for that, send that to dcatsoftball@gmail.com or reach out to either of us with any questions as you continue to move through your recruiting process. I certainly hope and plan to see some of you at our upcoming sessions in California and in New York. If you have any questions about those, especially, feel free to reach out. And thank you all so much for taking some time out of your evening to talk with us about recruiting. Thank you for attending.